Hi, everybody. We are so excited to have you with us today. My name is Judith Silverman Hodara from Fortuna Admissions. We're going to wait for a minute or two for some other folks to join us on the line, but really glad to have you with us as we sort of talk a little bit about how to create your MBA target list and research schools. So delighted to have you with us on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. I'm joined by my fabulous colleagues, Emma Bond and Julia Brady. Emma is a former London Business School senior manager of MBA Admissions, and Julia is a former managing director at Kellogg and former senior associate dean at University of Chicago. And it's such a joy to be able to work with them today. Just a little bit about Fortuna. We are, as you probably know by now, a dream team of former admissions officers and directors, over 40 of us from all of the world's top business schools. You can sign up for a free consultation with us at www.fortunaadmissions.com. I have a lot of fun doing these consultations. We have a great team of people that are eager to talk with you, hear a little bit about what you're thinking about and how we can be of help. So it really is a wonderful half hour. It is free, and we would love you to go ahead and sign up for that with us. A couple of notes about today's session. We are going to encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A box, which is a little bit easier for us to read and keep track of. So we look forward to hearing from you. And again, you'll be meeting Emma and Julia. And I'm going to be moderating. Super excited to have you with us. Our previous master classes have included wonderful, wonderful discussions with other members of the Fortuna team. And you can certainly watch those sessions and all of our recordings on YouTube. You can see that URL right there. I got to tell you, we have the best time on these conversations. It's such a wonderful opportunity for us to chat with each other, share some really important insights with you. And we're excited to be able to do that today as well. So without further ado, we're going to kind of launch into our discussion topics for today. And Julia, we're going to start with, where do I start? Which is a very important question, of course, and would love to hear your take on how do you even start this whole process?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Judith. It's great to be here and contribute to this important dialogue. And, as you can imagine, it's an overwhelming process to begin with. So those on the call, whether you're sort of 4 to 6 months out to submitting an application, or maybe you're about 18 months out, the principles kind of remain the same in terms of a starting point. And it's really starting with reflection and deep introspection, so you can really be intentional about the choices. And so first and foremost, reflecting on the goals. So when you think about a business school, where do you envision yourself 5 years from now? And what do you hope the program to do for you in the future? In what ways is it positioning you? So if that's a career change that you aspire to, if it's certain skill sets that you're looking to acquire. And then also, as you think about motivations, it's even things like if there's even certain disciplines that might help hone the schools, if there's some that have certain faculty or programmatic experiences. So those are going to be some very important elements as you start. It's kind of that goal setting. And then with that, and then it's reflecting upon your sort of personal values, because there's going to be sort of right fit school academically and sort of professional development, and then right fit school culturally. So what are the values that drive you? How might those come to life in schools? And so then as you start to develop that target list of schools, and we'll talk more about research, but you'll have some things that you'll begin to evaluate against, because it is, there's going to be decisions around geography and other things that we'll get to. But I think reflecting on your goals, reflecting on your personal values is going to be a great starting point in sort of shaping that initial list.
And I wanted to ask Emma if she could also talk about, how do logistics factor into identifying your target schools? So Julia's talked a little bit about sort of the personal feelings and where you envision yourself, like introspection and really knowing yourself. Emma, can you talk a little bit about logistics?
Sure. Hi, Judith. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here today. Yeah, it's such a big question, isn't it? When you sort of start this process and you're looking at all the great schools out there, and you might be attracted by big names or maybe some schools that you've thought of your whole life and that's always been your dream school. And then actually when it comes to the crunch, you have to sit there and think about actually kind of sometimes what makes sense as well. So certainly, as Julia mentioned, geography comes into it. I'm sitting over here in the UK. You guys are over there in the US. Often we work with clients who are very keen on the M7 schools, who are really keen on sort of studying in the US in one of the big 2-year programs over there. Or sometimes I work over here with people who are looking at European schools. So perhaps maybe a 1-year program, or maybe London Business School here, which is 2 years. But really you need to sort of think about continent to start with, which is just so huge, and then perhaps country, and think about where you might want to end up after you graduate. So that's a really big thing when you sort of start thinking about location. So if you want to work in the US afterwards, does it make sense to come and do a program here in Europe? If you want to work in the UK, does it make sense to go off and do your program over in the US? So all those kind of things come into play. And then obviously there's a breakdown after that, which is, do I want a big city school? Would I prefer a campus which is a little bit smaller, a bit more collegial, where I feel a bit more part of a sort of community culture? So all of those things sort of come into play quite early on. And then I think the second thing is specialization. So when you're looking at schools and kind of breaking down which ones look like you know, they might fit into the list that you eventually come up with in terms of applications. Are you looking for a finance school? Are you looking for a consulting school? Does the school have a strong sort of tech recruiting round? All those kind of things come into it. And there are different ways of assessing that, and we'll talk about that a bit more as we go on, but you can look at sort of courses, curriculum, faculty, clubs, treks, and all that kind of thing. And then I think the other thing that's quite important that sometimes people don't think about, and it depends a little bit what sort of life stage you're at as an applicant, but that's sort of external factors like family. So you might have family that you need to stay close to, or you might really want to spread your wings and get an international experience during your study. But you might also be traveling with a partner and sometimes children. And that is something that can really make a difference, because if your partner's coming with you and they want to be able to work easily, how does that play into it? Is it going to be easy for them? Do they need a visa? All of that kind of thing. So I think all of those things come into play, certainly when you're sort of looking at logistics. And it's a really big question that you need to sort of drill down into and perhaps answer those hard questions first before it's a kind of head versus heart thing, I think, sometimes.
And I think, interestingly, we were just talking about this, that relocation is not as difficult as it used to be, right? Because a lot of people are still able to work virtually. So certainly, traveling with partners and families adds a level of complication and a level of excitement. But I realized I had more and more students telling me that as they were getting admitted this year, that somehow having a partner was, for looking for work was not as complicated as it might have been. So I found that pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Julia, how do you know which MBA format is the right one? We talk all the time with students that are 2 years or 1 year or part-time or full-time, and they look at me sometimes, they're like, I don't know how to make heads or tails of all of this information. So can you share some ideas with us about that?
Sure. Well, and I think, in that reflection process, this is to, some degree where the goals come into play as well, because depending on your post-MBA goals, there are still certain programs, certain career choices that a full-time MBA program could be the best fit if it's a significant pivot career-wise, where that internship is going to really launch you into your new, that next career. So investment banking is one that comes to mind. Yet at the same time, so if you're thinking, format in terms of, is it, part-time or full-time, and you might have the type of, work experience that could fit with either. I think, these part-time or evening weekend programs, those are now offering so much more in terms of career support Many of the same recruiters are going to those campuses as well. So when you look at sort of that format, then it's somewhat in terms of like your life fit goals. So if you're in a career or in a professional path that it just doesn't make sense, it's sort of the opportunity cost of taking a 1 or 2 year break to do a full-time program is too significant. That's where the part-time programs can make sense, or even the executive MBA programs. If you are nearing the 10-year mark or more, the MBA format can make. Actually worked with a client this past year, actually Judith and I together, who was right at that 10-year mark. And so what he did, he was in healthcare administration, and was very focused, but he looked at as well as an MBA program because he realized it could go either way for him. He got into the MBA, and that's the one it's a little more immersive, and that's the path he chose. But during that process, the other format that's continuing to grow is online. And during that application process that he was in is when Haas, so probably the first, of the top tier programs to offer an online option for their part-time. And so it's going to be, kind of that life fit, those career goals, where you are in your professional stage. That can really help gauge that, what is a format. But sometimes you don't necessarily have to make that final choice at the application process. That's, you could have a few options and then see at the time of admissions what's going to be best fit for you personally.
So it's a really, really important conversation. And for those of you that are with us today, now is a great time to be asking yourselves those questions. So definitely a good opportunity to sort of say, okay, well, with all this information out there, what's really going to be the right fit for me? Yeah. And speaking of, go ahead, Julia.
And I just want to address one of the questions that came up related to this. So 8 years of experience, does the full-time program make sense? But this individual who asked the question says, they're keen on a geography change. So that's another thing that full-time. And so maybe it's an accelerated program. So one thing to think about, if you have 8 years experience, and maybe if you have an undergraduate degree in a related business field, there are programs, Kellogg among them, that offer 1 year or accelerated MBA program. So you might be able to get the best of both that could kind of launch you into a new geography, particularly if you're abroad and looking to maybe future work experience in the US, or if you're looking at that sort of European or other elements of that experience, both culturally as well as that, opportunities professionally, that's where those, what I'd say full-time or more higher residential programs. As we think about the executive MBA programs, both Kellogg and UChicago have residencies on their different campuses. So you may be commuting to Chicago or geography, within a few hours of you, but you'll probably still have an opportunity to experience those other cultures. So I just wanted to address that.
Emma, we wanted to talk a little bit more about fit and how do you gauge fit?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's one of those questions and one of those kind of words that comes up all the way through the MBA application process. And when you've sat in an admissions committee and you've looked at a candidate and thought, is this person the right fit for that school? And then often you have clients say, I don't really understand what fit really means. And it is I guess exactly what it says. It's how you align with the culture and the values of your target schools. Are you feeling this school? Do you feel that if you are accepted onto the program that you would be able to mesh with the current students? Would you be happy as part of the alumni body? Do you feel that the school is representative of your core values and the things that you want out of your MBA program, and also to a sort of longer term extent out of your own life? And I think the best place to start with fit is to go back to what Julia was saying about sort of a period of really quite deep self-reflection. And that's obviously something that we do when we work with our clients right at the beginning of a project, is to send them our very long strategy questionnaire and ask them about these things that are really important to them. And, that's why you have schools like Stanford that ask questions in their application process. What matters most to you? What is it that's most important? And I think by taking a step back and trying to understand what is important to you, what your goals are, what your values are, what your interests are, what your learning styles are. Are you somebody that really likes a very small collegial classroom? Are you somebody that will fly in a really big, very competitive program? Once you've got a better kind of understanding of those things, then you have a much higher chance of finding a school that that will work for you, and that will be a program that will sort of work towards giving you what you want out of an MBA program. So I think it's really, really important to do your due diligence. We'll talk a little bit more about outreach, I think, as we get further on. But look at the culture of the school. So look at the sort of really quite basic things initially, like the size of the program, how they're split into different streams. Do they have a cluster format? Sort of, I guess also I would say beware of the stereotypes. So I think often when you're first looking at schools, or if you're talking to other people, you'll hear, oh, this school is really competitive, or this school is, more collaborative. And actually, I think all schools have aspects of these kind of areas. So I think that you have to be a bit careful about just sort of going with what you've heard about a finance school or a school that's big on consulting, because they change all the time and they adapt to the classes that are coming in, and they adapt to the demands of the recruitment market. So they do change and sort of ebb and flow as they go. But I think for me, when I sort of talk to my clients about trying to work out a list of schools that they're going to target and narrow it down so they're not sort of scattergunning, as we call it, to a bunch of different programs, at the end of the day, it comes down to looking at the program, looking at your own goals, looking at how they match with what the school has to offer, and then saying, actually, is it a place that I'm going to be happy? Am I going to enjoy 2 years? Can I see myself on that campus? Can I see myself as part of this community? Does it feel right? And I think, if you've done that process of self-reflection clearly and really taken some time over it, you're much more likely to get the fit right. Because it is, as much as the admissions committee says, is this candidate right for us? Are they the right fit? It's also about you deciding the school is right for me. It's the right fit for me.
And I think that that's really important, right? Not just sort of taking the rankings at the face value and thinking about your own life and the kind of community you envision yourself being a part of. And you'd be surprised, people don't always say yes to the quote highest ranked school on the list because they don't feel like it's a good personal connection for them. So lots of different reasons. And I know that sounds crazy right now as you are all considering, where to apply and how could you possibly turn down school X, Y, and Z. But, you get a sense about somewhere, and you might feel like it just doesn't fit in with who you are and where you envision yourself going.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I had a client actually on a very similar sort of track like that last year. So he had applied to several schools, got a few really, really great offers, and he'd been targeting one particular school all the way through his application. And he was, Emma, this is the school I'm going to. If I get offered here, I'm going. I'm like, great, magic, fine, got an offer, great, magic. And then kind of at the last minute, he'd also got an offer from another really great school. And I think he went to campus and attended an open day or something, and he'd started up a conversation with a couple of students. And before I knew it, he'd accepted the offer there. And you literally could have knocked me over. I would never have seen that coming.
I remember this. You called me. You're like, he said yes to XYZ. I was like, what?
But that's the thing, isn't it? Sometimes the school gets under your skin, and sometimes you just, I guess, when you know, right? And that's when the fit question is answered, I think.
Mm-hmm. I know we have a couple of questions. I just want to go back for 1 second, if I can do this without ruining everything. Age is never a deal breaker at all. They want to understand why it is that you're coming in at a specific time in your life and in your career. We can certainly talk to you more about this one-on-one if you want to sign up for a consultation with us. But it's not that 4 to 6 may be the average, but again, that doesn't mean that they're not looking at people with 2 years of experience or 11 years of work experience. So basically the rule of thumb is if you just need to talk about why it is that you've made a decision to apply at a certain time in your career, but there is no sort of right answer in that way. And again, always happy to talk more about that. I also see that we have a question about the joint degree program, and I'll make sure that I circle back and answer that towards the end as well. Julia, can you talk to us a little bit about balancing a program cost with the return on investment or the ROI?
Sure, sure. Well, first and foremost, it's really thinking about this again as a long-term investment. And so even if you are, 8 to 10 years or more work experience, it's, you still have a long career ahead. And what an MBA also can allow you to do is it can be prepared for pivoting over time and giving you this broader skill set that you can employ in different ways and in different aspects of your career. So in some ways, your ROI program cost, sometimes that is driven by format. So depending on what role sort of that cost plays, that's also, important to think about of, do you pursue this while working? Because that's a different element. And then as you look at the pure ROI, so whether it's a full-time program or something else, is really looking at, the growth in many different ways. So in terms of the professional elements, that sort of professional transformation and where your career can take you from that, evaluating the network, even just that going back to that brand and that association, but making sure that, not just kind of sticking to what externally, validators of the brand are, but what fits right for you, because it's a lifelong affiliation that you will have with this school, and really to get the most out of it. And now, as I am decades away from my own MBA experience, is that, being able to remain connected. And I have been able to tap into not just professional opportunities, but even sort of development opportunities over time, the career network, the friendships. So there's a lot of those elements. But I have to say, having that MBA on my resume has opened many doors. And it's not just from others who went to the same program. It's just the fact that I went to a rigorous program. I was able to sort of make some career moves related to that. But it's really can be this reflection of a certain type of, an intellectual fortitude and the ability to kind of make that commitment and succeed in that way. So there are really many factors to take into consideration when doing that.
And, certainly that's definitely something that a lot of students are asking us now, with regards to the ROI with the economy as it is. So that's definitely something that's on everybody's mind. And I think a really important conversation to be having with yourself about, what is the ROI? Because as you mentioned, ROI has many different, it's not just about compensation, right? It's about all the other benefits that you possibly would derive from this program. So, and you've mentioned a few, obviously, in your own personal development, which I think is so important. And even now, I have to tell you, I was just at my university reunion, but there was a Wharton reunion going on at the same time. And it was amazing to see people that were 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years out, and what that interaction was like that is priceless to me. Those kinds of connections.
Well, and I think, what's another thing that speaks to the value is those who pursue, many who are pursuing an executive MBA that are 20 plus years into their career, yet they still see that value. So some of it, again, if your motivation, if you are that type of learner, and there's also that sort of personal intrinsic value, but also that's going to allow you maybe in your 40s or 50s to start a new business, partner with others, really, provides this lifelong flexibility. But sort of, again, that's where sort of your goals and motivations come into play again, in terms of if it is a little more of like, okay, I need it, checking the box, I don't want it to set me back too much financially. There are then programs out there that just from a price point might be better fit. But as you're looking at top tier programs, it's kind of really evaluating it beyond just that, let's say 5-year ROI, and really thinking about it over the lifetime of your career.
Yeah, and I was just going to say also, like, how many people and clients do we know who've met their business partner at business school? And you mentioned stuff, but it's that sort of experience of being with other ambitious, sort of driven people who are like-minded, who want to start up businesses and who have that kind of drive. And that's a really big takeaway for a lot of people. And that's again, another lifelong kind of benefit, I think, of definitely of doing an MBA.
Mm-hmm.
And we would love to talk, if you have specific questions. And again, I just want to encourage you to please put questions in the Q&A box if you have additional questions for us. And I know in the chat box, there were some very specific questions about NYU. If you could do us a favor and reach out to us, we're more than happy to talk with you. It's a little tricky to answer very specific kind of program related questions on this chat, but be delighted to speak with you outside of the realm of today's session. Emma, how do I learn the real MBA experience at my target schools? This has become somewhat complicated in the COVID era, but I'm sure you have some ideas for us on other ways to get around it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's become more complicated, but I think as everyone's got more comfortable with being online for everything, it's in some ways it's become a little bit easier, because I think sometimes people are more open to you reaching out via email and via LinkedIn and all those kind of platforms. So I guess the overriding answer is do your outreach and explore and talk to people who are living the experience. So that means finding students who are currently at the program, speaking with alum, speaking with admissions, but really for me, it's having that conversation with people who have been there and done that. So they're living or have lived through the experience. So in order to find those contacts, sometimes you have them already in your existing network. But if not, friends of friends, friends of colleagues, go through your colleagues, partners at work, so many people you will eventually, be able to access. If all of that fails through your own network, then approach the school. So if you're interested in a particular school, most of them have ambassadors who are very happy to speak with you, and that's part of their sort of giving back to the program that they're attending, is to act in an ambassadorial role for the program, and they'll be happy to speak with you, tell you about the sort of the culture of the school, and tell you what it's actually like to be there on campus and to be involved in the treks and the clubs and the experiences. So that's kind of the main thing. I think when you're doing that, so what I try and encourage my clients to do is, if you go on, for example, say someone's applying to London Business School, if you go onto their website, they have a ton of ambassadors across all the different programs, so MBA, Sloan, Executive MBA. And I always try and encourage people to connect with someone who has a sort of similar backstory or who's interested in sort of pursuing a similar path to you. I think that's really helpful. So if you're interested in working in VC or PE when you graduate, then it's more helpful often to speak to somebody who's come in with a similar type of goal to you. And then once you've had that conversation, sort of go away and think about it and explore then the opportunities that conversation has thrown up. And sometimes you'll speak to one person and they'll say, oh, well, I know someone who's involved in this, and I'll introduce you to them. But I think, obviously speak to Julia if you're interested in where she went to do her MBA. It's really the very, very best option is to speak to people who've been there and who've lived it and experienced it.
And don't be afraid to dig, to be very specific, because it seems a little overwhelming. How am I ever going to find, people that are interested in or general information about the school? But if you use your network and you're like, right, I was very involved in comedy when I was in college, for example, do I want to, or university, do I want to talk with someone? Is there a comedy group? And can I talk to people that have something in common? Or I'm in a specific industry, or I come from a certain location, right? So if you think about the things that are important to you, that really helps to distill it a little bit more. And because otherwise it can seem like an overwhelming flow of information. Also, for those of you that are familiar with the Forte Foundation, Forte is a great organization, encourages young women to apply to business school, terrific opportunities to talk with current students and alumni. There's also the MLT, Management Leadership for Tomorrow, similar kinds of opportunities for diversity candidates. So use the kinds of networks that the schools are putting out there. And then also, people are going to be happy to pick up the phone and have a conversation with you. So
Yeah.
certainly encourage you to do that as well. One thing we say is that going to a school to discover it on a day that they're rolling out the red carpet is not a great day to go, because everyone's on their best behavior and, everyone's all neat and shiny and on time. So go like on a random Tuesday when nobody's expecting you. And I typically find that that's a great way to really find out what school is like on that given day. Julia, other kinds of tips on how to get to know your target school, in addition to the one fun fact that I just shared?
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, and I think it's just, again, in doing your research, because, spending time also on, a lot of schools now have blogs that are maintained by students. Again, it might be through the admissions office, but it really does, you start to hear the voices of those there, trying to connect with alumni. I think another important thing to keep in mind, and that I know top schools really appreciate, is getting to know the intellectual life at the school. And the ways you can do that are through sort of the knowledge, the thought leadership that they're disseminating. So Wharton, has their knowledge at Wharton. Sign up for that if Wharton is potentially on your target list. Kellogg has Kellogg Insight. And so you'll be able to learn kind of about the faculty research, sometimes faculty or other leadership voices in that. And you never know how that might kind of create a connection, because what you really are going to, what's going to be important for you to do in the application process is be able to very intentionally and authentically connect the dots of why this is the right school for you. So as you've done this reflection and you've thought about, your experiences, your interest levels, but then you've seen, wow, well, I watched this thing, or I read 3 of Adam Grant's books, and I really want to study with so-and-so, or this in terms of emotional social competencies, that is another expertise at Wharton, or diverse leadership at Kellogg. And that's, that's an important connection you can make, that it can be differentiating, but again, at the same time, very authentic. So that is, as you get further in the process, and I know Emma's going to talk about sort of that narrowing of the list, but then really once you've kind of gotten past some of that surface level and you're ready to make the campus surprise visits, as Judith mentioned, really find different ways to do your research to get to know both the cultural life as well as that sort of classroom intellectual life.
Great ideas. Thank you so much for sharing them. And just, there's a lot of information at your disposal. And keep in mind that the website is always bright and shiny, right? So you probably want to find other ways to find out about your campus that are not necessarily the ones that the school is putting out into the universe. Emma, here's the question that we're all thinking about as all the schools are starting to line up and release their questions and release their word counts. And we have 4 months to the first deadline. What should I work on first?
Well, for starters, I can't believe we're at this point in the year again.
I know it's a cycle. It is a cycle, Emma. There is no rest for the weary.
There isn't, and the European schools obviously run a bit later, so we're still finishing off that for last year, and then we're now looking at this year. So I think just to add on to what Julia was saying, certainly in terms of getting involved in what the school is putting out there in terms of thought leadership is a great way to start your outreach, but also they do run all sorts of webinars, the schools. Yes, you can get to campus sometimes, and that's a really sort of beneficial way of getting to feel a little bit of the school atmosphere, even if they are rolling out the red carpet on that particular day. But just as an aside, most schools now have very sophisticated CRM systems, and they do track your involvement with the school. And so if you sign up for a webinar right early in the season, by the time you drop your application in their box in September, and if you can, they look back and they'll see how many times has this person interacted with us? Have they been to a webinar? Did they sign up for a coffee chat? And they actually do track you all the way through. So it's a good way to kind of get on their radar and to show that actually, your interest in the school is authentic and you didn't just pull your application together in the last couple of weeks. But in terms of 4 months out, it's tricky because some schools are early birds and they get their essay topics out early, and if they do, that's great. A lot of schools don't, particularly here in Europe, we're a bit later, and they often don't come out until June, sometimes July. And that can be frustrating because clients and candidates are ready to go and they want to sort of put pen to paper and actually sort of get started. And sometimes you have to say, well, we just have to wait a little bit. But there are things that you can do, as well as the sort of self-reflection that we've talked about. One of the best things to do is to start lining up your recommenders. A lot of schools now only require one, but some do still require two. And it's really important. I mean, we've done tons of blogs and lectures and webinars on this, but choosing the right person to actually be in your corner and to produce that recommendation for you is really, really important. So sitting down, being thoughtful about who you choose, and then having a conversation with them and assessing whether they will back you all the way and whether they are on board and understand what the process is. All of that kind of conversation can take place quite early, and then you can start sort of sitting down and juggling ideas about and thinking of concrete examples that will make it easier for them to pull that recommendation together. You can also start thinking about your CV, right? So a lot of people actually, if you've been in one job for 2 or 3 years, they haven't updated their CV recently, and actually to go back and pull out those major achievements and major accomplishments and think about what you've actually been doing over the past year to 18 months and update your CV, that can be a really good way to get started. And those kind of things are what we generally sort of work on quite early with our clients when we are a bit further out still, and we're not quite sure whether such and such school is going to change their essay this year or whether they're going to change their word count this year, which I believe HBS has just done. They put a word limit in this year.
Yes, they did. I think they were tired of reading 15 pages from people that should have been sending in 15 pages.
I think you're right. So yeah, so there are things that you can do, and outreach for sure is a really, really big part of that. So have those conversations, learn about your schools, narrow your list down so that you have a manageable number of schools. It's really, I mean, everybody I guess has different numbers of schools that they think they can manage to do meaningful applications to, but you have to think about whether you can juggle and balance with work and commitments. So really sort of spending some time narrowing that is really useful as well.
And actually just want to piggyback on that. We got a question about, how many schools should I apply to? You just want to keep in mind that it is a strategy, right? So you don't want to put all of your top schools in round one.
Yeah.
You want to balance. Maybe you have a school that you're interested in, but it's not number 1 or number 2, but it's number 3. You want to show some love to number 3. There are a lot of schools that don't really care when you apply. There's going to be room for you no matter what. So just kind of keep that in mind, that there's also staggered deadlines. So you may find, although there's a lot in the beginning of September, there's some that are in October. So if you sort of start, I know this sounds crazy, but just look at when things are due, and then you can sort of start to make a plan, keeping in mind that things are going to come up. You're not going to necessarily be able to get everything done on the exact date that you hope it will be. I'm not sure who's commenting. Is it Emma or Julia? You sound like you want to jump in a little bit with that.
Yeah, well, no, and I also just wanted to, I just popped in the chat box and a recent article from our colleague Caroline that just regarding that decision process. And I think that's very important, but definitely with, to build on what Emma had said too, with the, in narrowing that selection, it's both balancing with your own work thing, but I've also worked with clients that are concerned, and rightly so, in asking their recommenders for too much at once.
Yeah, for sure. Can I just throw something else in there?
Yeah, of course.
Is that don't be afraid to cut schools as well. I feel sometimes like we speak with often sort of new clients when they are in that process of trying to narrow things down, and they're like, oh, but I sort of heard about this school, or I think I should apply to this school. And if I sit down and say, well, let's say we go through the whole process and you've now got 5 or 6 schools, which is a lot because some of these schools have a number of essays, and you have to show the love for each and every school and each and every essay. And if you get to a point where you get offers from all of these schools, are you actually going to take it? Can you see yourself there? Do you want to go to that school? Realistically, really, do you see yourself attending that program? Because if you don't, then there really, from my point of view, is not a lot of point in sort of going through the process and putting the effort in, because you really should be channeling the energy and the time that you have into really doing the very best application possible for the schools that you are really passionate about. And if you aren't passionate about a school, no matter how much sort of time you put into it, I don't think the application will ever really shine in a way that will sort of do you justice.
So that's really important, right? Giving yourself the self-understanding, I guess, to recognize like what you are capable of doing, and and putting out your best effort, and not feeling like it's okay. You could wait, you could do different schools. Like there's no prescriptive way to go through this. And thank you again, Julia, for putting up that article. I did want to address a couple of questions that we got in our Q&A. Someone has asked us, based on work experience and future goals, I'm really interested in dual degree programs. Is there an inherent advantage or disadvantage with regards to applying to dual degree programs? So anybody want to take that one?
Julia, are you up for that? I think they're more common in the US than here.
Yeah, it is. So I guess it comes back to, I don't think there's an advantage or disadvantage specifically. It's really more, it becomes an advantage only if you are very intentional about how these two programs work together to further your professional goals. And it can be something that might sort of set you apart a bit as a candidate. So if there is a school, so let's say, it's Harvard and there's also the Kennedy School, and you're looking at, working in leadership in non-governmental organizations, but you need that business degree. It's that I think is most important. I don't necessarily see it as a disadvantage. It will, it sometimes has more to ask of you through the application process. So just being very, very much kind of to Judith's earlier point about, you can't fake it. So if this is some dual degree experience is going to add a lot to me and personally, then it's valuable to go for it.
But I think, you want to look into, I can't tell if your question, forgive me, was, will I be looked at separately? Will I only be considered for both? You definitely want to talk to HKS and sort of find out, is that for the schools that you're looking at, can you be admitted to HKS and not admitted to the business program? So I've sat on these committees before, and everybody, trust me, has such a different take on it. So you want to make sure that you're in touch with the school specifically about what their parameters are. Sorry about that. A question about optimal time to reach out for current students. It's really no time is a good time. So fire away. People can't talk to you. They'll let you know. It's not like, oh, I should wait until September when they're back in school, because then there's a whole nother reason they're not going to be able to talk to you. They're busy. But if they're going to respond, you should feel comfortable in reaching out. And lastly, there was a question about working for a family business. A lot of schools love family businesses. It's not super duper common in the United States specifically. Definitely reach out to family business institutes at the schools that you're looking at. Talk to people that are in the family business club. All the schools know that it's really hard to get a recommendation from your uncle if you are working directly for this uncle. So you probably want to reach out to a client or a collaborator. But really, schools are very well attuned to family businesses, especially coming from outside the United States, where that's not as uncommon. And would definitely encourage you to just do your due diligence. And not for nothing, but sometimes it's seen as a plus. Like, I know that the schools that we work with, many of them have very, very strong centers of family business and entrepreneurship. And would love to sort of, talk with you more about that. Julia and Emma, I don't know if you have additional comments on the family business question.
Yeah, certainly here in Europe, schools like LBS and NCA have great family business sort of clubs and curriculum offerings. So certainly they actively look for strong family business applicants. And usually people who've come from a family business background have a really interesting story to tell. Sometimes they've grown up and they've seen their parents or other members of their family kind of manage a family business through ups and downs and troughs, and they're looking often to do an MBA to go back and really scale that business and either turn it digital or sort of scale it into different international markets. So there's often a real drive to achieve and to make a difference that is quite tangible for schools, I think, other than, not that there's anything wrong with wanting to go to business school to become a management consultant, but that's quite a common path. And sometimes if you come in having sort of bringing that passion for your family business and saying, this is what I want to do when I graduate, it's very easy for the admissions committee to look and see, and they'll go on and they'll investigate your family business website, and they'll see what sort of size of revenue is and all of that kind of thing. But it's something that they are interested in, because you bring a different perspective and a different value add to the classroom as well. So certainly something that's looked on positively by the European schools.
We wanted to thank you
and I would
much.
say,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The US, no, I was just going to say in the US as well. And just when I was doing some work with Chicago Booth in the executive MBA program, there were a number of family business students that, again, it seemed to fit with them better later in life. One thing on the application side, like as Judith mentioned, having a relative, it can, that maybe that's who you're working for and you need that. But if you can have a reference, so if you're involved in professional organizations, if you're contributing in other ways, so there might be others kind of are adjacent to your business, maybe not direct colleagues or family members that can also comment on your professional abilities, your intellectual capabilities, those types of things could be very valuable.
So again, just so happy to have you guys with us today. I'm delighted to have spent time. It's always fun to see Julia and Emma. We don't get together nearly as often as we'd like to, because we are in every single time zone you can possibly imagine. So please feel free to sign up for a free consultation with us. We would love to see you. And then our next session is coming up. You can register at fortunaadmissions.com. I'm going to be hosting the next session, which I believe is quite possibly next week or the 15th. I'm not quite sure, but we look forward to having you with us at any rate. If you do have additional questions, please feel free to reach out. As you can tell, we're a very friendly bunch, eager to chat. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thanks so much, Emma and Julia, and we will see you guys soon. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Yes.